WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
All right, 6 minutes after 11 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. When I was younger, I would go to church and would look at the hymnal. And for some reason, when people were singing, I wasn't. I was looking at the names of the people who wrote the songs, and I was looking at the years, and I would see, oh, this was written in 1948, right? Thinking that was so long ago. And I'm not. It doesn't even occur to me that the words that the pastor is saying at the front of the church were written 2,000, 3,000 years ago. But I'm more impressed with a song that was written in 1948. Yeah. That's an old song. It's a fascinating thing, really. The books that we look to for guidance, especially from God, and we call that the Bible. If you're a Muslim, you call that the Qur'an. Jewish people call, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. This just shows how ignorant I am with this whole subject. But I'm fascinated by the subject, and I'm fascinated how the books, the holy books, I guess we could say, have influenced humanity all these years, right? And they weren't always books as we know them now, right? For the longest time, they were just spoken words, right? Weren't
Exactly.
they like texts weren't even readily available until the invention of the printing press. So only a few people had actual textual copies of the books that we're talking about. So there's one book. If you're looking at the streaming video right now, I have the camera aimed at the book. It's called The Qur'an and the Bible. This is an amazing piece of work by our guest, Gabriel Said Reynolds. He has studied the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Qur'an, and he has made comparisons and shows us that, it's not as different as you think. And if you have any Muslim friends, as we do, it doesn't seem like their lives are that different. It doesn't seem like it's all that different. I mean, I know the press sometimes paints a different picture of all of us. But when you actually get to know people, it doesn't seem to be all that different, except the food. Mm-hmm. Do not eat gefilte fish. That is the worst thing ever. No. Don't even try that thing. Let's say hello to Gabriel Said Reynolds. Good morning, Gabriel.
Good morning. Great to be with you.
Where are you?
Well, I'm at Notre Dame on the campus here in South Bend, Indiana.
Okay. Well, thank you for doing this. This took some time, didn't it?
Yeah, it was like 4 or 5 years of work. Work. Some of it was done in the Middle East when I was traveling there, scholars, and a lot of it here at Notre Dame.
So did you have almost an instinctive interest in the religions of the world, at least these three religions?
Yeah, I wasn't always interested. I began to travel to the Middle East when I was in college. So I started going to, the first place I went to was Jordan. I went to Amman, Jordan. As I got out of the plane into the airport, I heard the call to prayer that was broadcast, by loudspeakers inside the airport. And I began to appreciate, how intense and fervent Muslims are about their faith, how public the religion is. And I became very interested in questions of Islam, its relationship to Christianity, and continued to study that in the 25 years or so. That's been my passion.
I think the thing that most people wonder about is, especially if you at least know that Abraham is the common denominator, why is it that the people who follow the different religions want to fight one another? I don't know that it's true in America. I mean, we have Muslim friends and Jewish friends and atheist friends, and but I mean, in the world stage, it seems that way.
Right. That's the big question. That is the big question, which is the key in thinking about the relationship with believers. But when we look at the scriptures, there's peace between the scriptures. They're closely related. They share many of the same characters, characters that we know from the Bible, Adam started the beginning. Adam, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, even Mary, they're all found in the Qur'an. And many of the stories told about them, for example, going back to the beginning, the story of Adam and Eve in the garden and the temptation, the tree, and all that stuff, it's all there in the Qur'an as well. So there's a lot of commonalities in the scriptures. It's when people get involved And the question of interpretation and authority comes up, that there's division and sometimes conflict.
Yeah. And do the stories? See, I'm always confused. I'm not a Bible scholar, but on Sunday mornings, right, I come into the radio station and I play the church programs that we have, and I listen to them.
Okay.
And sometimes they will say, okay, a recent one that comes to mind is the story of Jonah. And the priest who doing this one said Jonah probably wasn't really swallowed by a whale. And then he gave us the meaning of that. And not that I'm getting into that now because I'll probably mess it up. But my thinking was, well, how do we know which stories were supposed to be parables and which ones were historically accurate? How do we know the difference?
Right. Yeah, it's a great point. And, believers themselves are divided over these questions. Most Muslims, would say that the Qur'an, the stories in it, this is how it really went down. The story of Jonah, I'm glad you mentioned that. It's also found in the Qur'an. Jonah is called the companion of the fish, Dhul Nun in Arabic, in the Qur'an. And so the story is there as well. And most Muslims, it was a really big fish, and it could have, any miracles can took place. As many Jews would speak about the biblical book of Jonah, they would say really happened before he went off to Nineveh and preached and things like that.
Uh-huh.
But, in Islamic tradition itself, there are divisions between scholars, some of whom would say there's a metaphorical meaning to things, there's symbolic meanings. Let's not take everything by the book or literally. Let's take some of it symbolically. So that's there as well in the Islamic tradition.
And that's a very important word that you're using, is traditions, because Christianity has their traditions. Islam has their traditions, and you make really good points in the book by giving examples.
Right. So the book, the Quran and the Bible is not about the Quran itself or the Bible itself. It's about Jewish and Christian books that are not in the Bible but have some connection to the Quran. To give one story, there's some pretty stuff in the Quran about miracles Jesus accomplished that are not in the New Testament. For example, the Quran says Jesus spoke in the cradle. So as an infant, he spoke, even defended his mother from accusations that Mary was guilty of fornication.
Wow.
So those stories... Yeah, and those are stories that we know from Christian tradition. If you hunt around in the library long enough, you're going to find early Christians tell those stories, but they're not in the New Testament, and they find their way into the... Does
Muhammad appear in the New Testament at all?
No, so Muhammad, according to the traditional dates, he's born in AD 40 in the city of Mecca, and he begins to preach the messages given to him, again, according to Islamic belief, by starting in the year 610 and preaches for the next 22 years. But, it's coming many centuries after the close of the New Testament. Some Muslims, good you raise the point actually, because some Muslims would actually say, yeah, but if you read the New Testament, you can find predictions of Muhammad in the same way that Christians would say, if you read the Testament, you can find predictions of Jesus.
Okay. Not to bring these books into this, but for example, the Book of Mormon seems to be another book that talks about Jesus here in America, I think. I'm not a scholar on that either. No. And then there's
you got it right.
Like the Hare Krishna, you look at a lot of the stuff they teach, and again, I'm not an expert, but a lot of it sounds familiar. A lot of it is about being nice to one another. So where does the infidel part come from? Why do people always say that there's this message to kill the infidels?
Yeah, it's pretty complicated, and most of it goes down when it comes to the question of interpretation. So just to use the example of the Quran seems to have two demands upon humanity. First, believe in God, and second, live ethically, live morally. But then you have messages which speak about the non-believers, those who reject the message, and they're sort of like dispositions or attitudes toward believers. So we have a verse like Quran chapter 9 verse 29, if anyone wants to look it up in the book, which seems to suggest that Muslims are to take action against Jews and Christians. But then you have other verses like in chapter 2 and chapter 5 which say, no, Jews and Christians, they're okay, they're actually going to go to heaven, so they're among those who are going to be saved. So what do you do? I mean, that's where the rubber meets the road, right? What do you do when you have these two different messages in the same book? And that's where the act of interpretation comes in.
Well, can't we look at all the books? Can't we look at everything through the lens of 2018? I mean, can't we say, you know, we've learned a little bit since these books were written, and maybe we need to behave a little bit better? I mean, the founding fathers of this country called themselves Christians, but yet they did not look at African Americans as equals. But now we do.
Right.
Now we do. Now we have this, you know, a new lens to look at things through. Maybe that's part of it. Right.
That's a key point, and that's somehow like the criterion, or the, like, you know, let's say less of what divides certain trends of Muslim scholars. So you have some Muslim scholars that will be known, you just use a fancy term here for a moment, as Salafis, that will be somehow oriented towards the way Saudi Arabia propagates Islam, who would say, no, listen, the way you do religion right is you preserve ancient Islam, which they consider to be authentic. Laws there, either in the Quran or the sayings of Muhammad, you follow those. How you eat, how you deal with others, it's all there, and you. But then you have many Muslims who say, no, you have to do two things. You have to understand the original context, and you have to understand your context. So just example, like the headscarf, many Muslims would say, we find traditional headscarf, so women must wear it. And then you have other Muslims who say, yeah, but the headscarf was connected to the 7th century context. Here in the 21st century, and maybe particularly in the West, it's not obligatory. It's just a choice. You can wear it or not.
And it just boggles my mind, because you've got all the radical groups out there on all fronts, and then even when, you know, ISIS does all those horrendous killings, they're always saying that they were guided by Muhammad, but it just isn't true, though.
So, you know, what they're guided by is a particular ideology called Salafism, which is shaped around this idea that, you know, there's a lot of interpretation. You should follow things literally. And not only that, they're very suspicious of principles of human rights and of democracy. So there's this idea, you know, that, you know, God is the ultimate lawgiver, is just God. God has sent down his laws, and we're to follow them literally, and be in opposition to anyone who refuses to follow them. Not how Muslims think generally. That's just this one ideology of Salafism, which unfortunately, you know, even in Saudi Arabia, there's diversity, but a lot of it goes back to Saudi Arabia, this sort of thinking. Most Muslims, the way they think about things is like Christians and Jews. Scripture, it needs interpretation. We want to live in the context we find ourselves, and we want to live in peace and tolerance with it.
Yeah. Gabriel Said Reynolds is our guest, and the book he has written is the Quran and the Bible. That sounds weird to say you wrote the Quran and the Bible, but it's let's see, a study of the two books, which are really many books. Let me ask you about that part of this. And then I really want to ask you about the work that you put into this, because it's a huge work. But the Bible is often referred to as many books, right? It's like the book of Job, the book of Hebrews, the book of Revelations, right? The book of. Is the Quran the same way? Is it really many books bound into one book?
Right. So there's a contrast there between the Bible and the Quran. You know, the Bible is, I like to tell my students, it's not a book, it's a library. You know, you have books within it over centuries, especially when we're speaking about the Old Testament or the Bible. You know, some of it goes back to the second millennium, the oldest layers of the Old Testament, and some of it is much later, and most of it's Hebrew, but some of it is written in Aramaic, and each author has his own personality. So the book of Job has a distinct perspective. Jonah has a distinct perspective. The New Testament is a collection of different books, the Gospels, the letters of Paul. The Quran is different. You know, the Quran, you know, Muslims would say simply the Quran is written by God. Some scholars would say, well, maybe it's a little more complicated. Maybe there was editing. Maybe there was different authors who were involved somehow. But it does seem to be that it was written in a relatively short period of time. It's all in Arabic, and it's a pretty short book. It's only about 2/3 the size of the New Testament.
Oh my!
I didn't know that. Wow! And is it available in like the Bible is available in American Standard English and modern language, and then the King James? So there's all these different versions to help, I guess, whoever the reader is to understand what the book, what it's trying to say. Does the same thing happen with the Quran? Is it available in the bookstore in a modern language way, especially for English?
Right. So in original, Muslims take great pride that the Quran was revealed by God through the angel Gabriel to the Muhammad in Arabic. And all Muslims, even if you're an American or you're Indonesian or Nigerian or whatever, you should be reading this you can in Arabic, because then you're actually encountering the words of God, a little bit like the Jewish disposition towards their Hebrew Bible, that it's best to read it in Hebrew because that's the way that God revealed it. But, when it comes to translations, there are dozens of translations out there of the Quran in English, most of them done by Muslims, some done by non-Muslims who want to do a really scholarly academic treatment of it. There's a good translation out there by someone named Arthur Droge. And, these translations, they differ in the same way. Some people are really focused on following the Arabic precisely, and some try to be more idiomatic. The translation in the book that I've published is done by an Iranian scholar named Qara'i, which is meant to be very readable. So I think it's useful for the book.
Do you have a variety of students from different religious backgrounds that take your class?
Yeah, I have taught all sorts of students. I've done teaching, of course, at Notre Dame, but also in the Middle East. I've taught in Beirut, Lebanon. And I've also had the opportunity to teach in prison. Notre Dame has a program where they'll send some to a state prison here in Indiana. And in that class, I had more Muslims than, because there were people who had converted to Islam in prison and really engaged with an in-depth reading and thought about how we can dialogue with each other. So, yeah, all sorts of background.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the book itself, the work that you've done? I mean, how painstaking was this, and did it change your view at all about either the Quran or the Bible?
I actually entered into the project with a firm conviction that these two books can be read together. There's a story that sort of inspired me to do the project, which is I was riding in a taxi once in Beirut, and the taxi driver, who was a Muslim, he had a copy of the Quran on his dashboard, and we were speaking about the Quran, and he said, but I want to show you something else. And he opened the glove compartment, and there he had a copy of the Bible. And it was like, I can read both of the books, and I find inspiration in both. So that was sort of inspired to work on this. But, through the course of working on the connections between the Quran and the Bible, something that really occurred to me is that Christianity is really present in the Quran. There's a lot of references to Jesus, to Mary, even to the apostles of Jesus, which suggests that in the time and place that the Quran was being proclaimed and written, there must have been an important Christian community there. And that just a final... That's a new argument. Islamic tradition says basically in Muhammad's context, there were pagans or polytheists and Jews, but not Christians. In this book, they said that's not exactly right. There must have been Christians there.
What kind of debates come up in your class between the different students? Is there one that stands out in your mind?
Well, there's a lot of, at Notre Dame, we're very interested in theology and thinking about God. And there's a lot of debate about the question of, do Muslims, Christians, and Jews worship the same God in the end? And there's one perspective, if you look at some of the stories in the Quran, the Quran doesn't speak of God as Father. It speaks of God usually as Lord. And there's other names for God like compassionate and merciful. But the picture of God is one of a Lord or a sovereign. And, some Christians will argue, but that's not the Christian image of God, or even the Jewish one, which is God as Father and people as children of God, whereas Islam doesn't use that sort of language for the relationship between God and humanity. So then people ask, well, do we have the same God at all? And, most scholars in my field would say there's so much in common, even though there's some difference, that, theologically, religiously, both faiths are monotheistic. And so we can hold that there's just one God that unites the faith.
Aside from the religious or faith part of this, my favorite thing is the cultural stuff. So if I go to a Muslim event and they have got all this music, there's some beautiful music that you don't hear anywhere else. And the food is always something different too. Same thing with when you go to a Jewish home, right? And they've got, especially if it's like an Orthodox Jewish home and they've got the Orthodox Jewish music, and I don't even know what they're singing, but it's pretty stuff, right?
Yeah.
What was that thing we heard the other day? You Can Drive My Car. Remember the Beatles song, You Drive My Car? Did you hear that one?
That was wonderful.
Gabriel, did you hear that song?
The original Beatles.
No, hold on. Let's see if I can find it for you. I think I can play it for you.
Okay.
Okay. Hold on. I think because they remember when Saudi Arabia started allowing women to drive cars?
Oh, yes, women driving. Sure.
Can I share it? I found it. Let me show it to you. It's in Arabic, right. I think. Here it is. Isn't that just beautiful? Listen.
بس انت فيك تعمل شي بالمعقول حبيبي رح اسوق السيارة ايه والله رح اسوق.
Isn't that pretty? Isn't that a pretty?
That's great.
And you understand her, right? You speak that fluently, right?
Right. I do speak and lived there for 3 years, mostly in Beirut, but in Damascus before the war started there. Yeah.
So I don't know if that was supposed to be fun or it was just pretty to me. And I guess that's what I'm trying to say is culturally, the thing that binds me with people who were brought up differently than me is that variety of cultural things, the music, the food, and the clothing sometimes. I'm not too into clothing, really.
Well, it's really, this, and this is the only part that really boggles my mind because all of the religions just really want people to treat others as they want to be treated, but there's always this conflict. I mean, it's like mine is better than yours doesn't exist. I just don't get it. I just don't understand why there's such a problem of acceptance.
And that's right. And there's so many things which draw people and don't forget that in the Middle East, most countries, now Saudi Arabia is a bit of an exception because there you have some fanatic attitudes towards non-Muslims, not among the people, but among the state ideology. But in most countries of the Middle East, whether it's Egypt or Syria or Iraq or even Iran, there has been coexistence between Muslims, Christians, and Jews for centuries. So large communities of Christians in Egypt and Syria and Iraq. It's dwindling in Iraq. And so it's things like music, the music star in Lebanon, but who's listened to throughout the Middle East, even in Morocco, is a Christian named Fayrouz, a woman, her there in the song. But, Muslims in Morocco, Algeria, listen to Fayrouz while they're drinking their coffee in the morning.
Isn't that something? Do you know what I was thinking, Gabriel, when I first found out about your book? Is that I was thinking, this is a man who wants to see peace in the world. You want to show everybody who's thinking there's a big difference to see that there isn't really that big of a difference.
Yeah, the book, it is meant to make a challenge to people, and it's sort of a two-way challenge. It's a challenge to Muslim readers to say, listen, the Qur'an, it didn't come from nowhere. It's integrating and in conversation with earlier traditions. And so you can actually understand the Quran better when you know the Bible and when you know Christianity. It won't threaten or undermine your faith, help you understand the Quran. But there's also a challenge to Christians and Jews. Listen, the Quran is part of this larger story of Scripture. It continues many of the stories found in the Bible. And so, if you want to appreciate the Quran, don't look at it as some like foreign, weird, strange, exotic literature. It's part of this Abrahamic tradition that Judaism and Christianity also share it.
Yeah. You want a strange book? Mein Kampf. That's the strange book.
Yeah.
Gabriel, you are impressing us in so many ways. Thank you for coming on the air with us. I have a copy. It's a huge book. It's gigantic. I don't know how many pages, but it's big. And I have a copy. It's here. If you want it, call me. I'll put your name on it and leave it for you. The rest of us have to buy it. Tell us how to do that.
Right. The easiest way is just to go on Amazon. The book is Quran and the Bible, Text and Commentary. You can look up my name, Gabriel Said Reynolds.
Okay. Gabriel Said Reynolds. Let me give this one away. Good morning. You've got the book. Who's this?
Vernon McIntyre.
Okay. Vernon, you know where we are, right?
I sure do.
Okay. Thank you, Vernon.
Thank you very much.
All right. Gabriel, thank you for being on the air. Thank you for what you're doing. I really do think this is going to make some people rethink what they thought they knew. That's what I think.
I've been delighted to be with you. Super. Yeah. Thank you.
And now you can't get Drive My Car out of your head, right? It's in your head, right? All right. Thank you, Gabriel. We'll be right back.
You're thinking about selling your home, but where do you start? Easy. Call Angie at 352-361-8359. Angie works with you to get your home sold. Angie is more than just an agent with Roberts Real Estate. She's a pro with heart. Call her at 352-361-8359, and you will know you have the right person.
I'm Angie Umpleby, and I'm looking forward to working with you when you call me at 352-361-8359. That's 352-361-8359.
Hi, I'm Anthony with Finishing Touch Floors. Are you considering covering your old wood floors? Forget about it.